Hello, so hi everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Helen Rawnsley, and I'm the Partnerships Manager for Birmingham St Mary's Hospice. And I'm really happy to be joined by Hannah and Emily, who are two of our hospice social workers, as well as Jen and Holly from Neo Cremations. And we're really happy to be working alongside Neo. Over the past couple of months, we've been working on some blogs together, and we're just looking at really creating a really great partnership that can, help people to kind of be more aware of the kinds of things they can do around planning their funeral. So what we're going to be doing on this Facebook Live is just spending a bit of time chatting through all things funeral planning. So we're going to be covering all kinds of questions, like how funerals look different now, what you can do to plan for the future, as well as what support is available. So Hannah and Emily, would you first like to kind of introduce yourselves and your role at the hospice?
Yes, so I'm Hannah Warwick. I'm a palliative care social worker. I've been at the hospice for 5 years now, and we work alongside the doctors, the nurses, the different medical professionals to support a patient and their family. And we support with sort of any practical things that might come about when someone has a terminal illness through to when they're bereaved.
And I'm Emily, and I do the same role as Hannah in the family and carer support team.
Cool. And Jen and Holly, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourselves and also a bit about Neo?
Sure. I am. My name is Jen, and I'm part of the care team at Neo. And my job here is to really help and support families during the hardest times of their lives. So I offer guidance. I'm there with them every step of the way throughout the funeral planning process. And that's my role here.
Yeah, hi, I'm Holly, and I also work in the care team with Jen. I help with the planning of funerals. And trying to make them as sustainable as possible, but also put the families at ease and help them through the process.
Great. And thank you so much to everybody who submitted a question in advance of today's webinar. We put out a few social media posts over the last couple of weeks. So thank you to everyone who's got in touch and sent in your questions. If you've got any questions that kind of pop into your head as we go along, then just pop them into the comments and then we'll make sure that we ask the experts. Alternatively, if you don't want to ask live today, then you can email into us your question and then we will make sure that it gets answered. So let's kick off with maybe start with Hannah and Hannah and Emily here. But how have the rules around funerals and planning funerals changed over the lockdown?
So first of all, even just down to how you get a death certificate has changed. Once you'd go to the office and it'd all be done in person, whereas now that's not the case. Normally, if they're in a hospital, they'll actually contact the register office to register the death, and then the certificate will be sent to you. So there's a lot more that's done online and as opposed to in person, and this then can obviously start the process to actually arrange a funeral with a funeral director. And so actually some of the immediate things have changed as well as actually what you're allowed to do when it comes to funerals. So
a lot of the government guidelines have changed, which can be quite restrictive for families. It can limit what they can do and what they can't do, as well as what family can be a part of the funeral, which is really difficult for families and can make complications for the grieving process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Jen and Holly, what have you found from your work?
Yeah, so we also I see what Hannah was saying about the things a lot more remote. Yeah, especially the kind of paperwork and appointment style that it used to be, where you'd meet people in person and kind of have an appointment first before going through the process. Especially with the registrars, that is one of the elements that's definitely changed. It's now more done digitally and over the phone rather than face-to-face meetings. We've noticed this as well. And we also have this as part of our service as well. Families are able to, just pop online now to book funerals with us as well. And so they just have to do a 3-step form online rather than a face-to-face appointment at a traditional shop front that you'd normally have for a funeral. And that can be just done without any physical contact or meeting face-to-face. It's just all done remotely now.
Yeah, it's really great to have things kind of easy to access online. I think at the moment, I think it's really helpful to have that service. And as we're all kind of getting more used to being online more, it's great to kind of take the stress out of it. Jen, did you want to add anything?
No, I think Holly's covered most of it.
So our second question, and Hannah and Emily, this probably links quite a bit to your work, but so what financial and emotional support is available to help any families organise a funeral at the moment?
So financially, it is the same as what was out there before. So there are some bereavement benefits that you can claim through the government if you're eligible. The funeral payment can help with the cost of a funeral, but you can only receive that if you are in receipt of income related benefits. So that'd be like income related universal credit, housing benefit, pension credit, them kind of benefits. And that benefit is generally paid in retrospect. And so they can't guarantee how much you're going to get to contribute towards the cost of a funeral. And normally you still need some money up front to actually start the process. There is also what used to be the widower's pension. That's for those that are married or in a civil partnership. And again, you get a lump payment up front. It varies depending on if you have children under 18 or not. And then you get a monthly payment for 12 to 18 months. Outside of that, there is very limited financial support out there. And so this is obviously very difficult for a lot of people in that funerals do cost a lot more than people think. And so, you know, the average cremation, you know, is around 3,500, whereas the average burial is over 5,000. But obviously financially it doesn't have to cost that much. And I really would say people need to consider that in the funeral they're planning, and actually that's why it's important to think ahead. Sort of in terms of the emotional support, the hospice can support. Emily.
Yeah, so the hospice is still there for the loved ones, carers, friends, emotionally. So we've got a bereavement service which can be accessed as and when the family feel that's appropriate, and that can be picked up even up to a year later when family members are still grieving. So there is that emotional support available as well as the practical help.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think it's really great to kind of share how long the hospice is there to support people after the death of their loved one, because actually it might not be immediately that they kind of want that support, but actually you guys are there for them at any point of their journey throughout their bereavement, and for support with getting things sorted before as well. So that's really, really helpful. And if anybody kind of wants to find out a bit more about that service, then there's loads of information on our website. You can get in touch there as well. But Jen and Holly, did you have anything to kind of add about that question about, you know, your experience at Neo?
Yes. So we are a kind of affordable. Our service is kind of geared around affordability ourselves. So we actually do find quite a few of our customers are need help in this way in some form or another. And as you mentioned, we have helped people through with the funeral expenses payment. Which is available, and as you said, the small issue with it is that it is normally in retrospect, which does need further investment, I think. There are other charities that we've had sessions with before, such as the Quaker Social Action. They actually have a campaign that is kind of geared towards protecting against funeral poverty, and they kind of help with some funding towards people who are struggling to pay for funerals as well. So they're a good source to check out if you need help.
Okay. Cool. And Jen, did you want to add anything, or was that all good?
Yeah, I think obviously from a funeral director's perspective, affordability is one of the pain points, and we're very flexible and we're open to having conversations with any family regarding their circumstances. But I think I guess the main advice I would lend to families would be to look for funeral providers that are really transparent in their pricing. Look for all-inclusive fees, because you don't want to get too far down the funeral process and then realize that there's more costs involved. So those are just two very practical things to implement when you're planning a funeral.
Okay, great, thank you. And I suppose again a question maybe for Jen and Holly to start off, but what kind of things can people do now to prepare for their own funeral, or for the funeral of their loved one in the future? What kind of things can they do to prepare now?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And really, there's never a perfect moment to start planning because, there is sort of a taboo around that subject. My advice is to consider it now, because you're able to make a very conscious decision about the provider that you want to go for. You have time and you have really the psychological capacity to do research, do some research about the types of organizations that the funeral providers associated with. Make sure that they have an ethos behind social and environmental impact. Those are important things that you might not be able to consider when the time comes. So that's why it's important to just consider it now.
Yeah, absolutely. And Hannah and Emily, what kind of things are you sort of saying to people that they can do to prepare?
Yeah, I think it's really, really important, because one of the things we find a lot is that people tend to think that their family know exactly what they want. And actually, when someone has died and, emotions are tense, it's a lot harder to communicate anyway, let alone getting different people to agree of how a funeral should take place. And so it's really important to do it in advance and have it, somewhere, because, it just makes it easier for the family when that time comes. Yeah.
Yeah, what Hannah says, I think when we work with a family, the most important thing we'd reiterate is just to share those wishes and feelings with their family members and loved ones, so that they can continue that for the funeral. And if that's not easily done verbally, it could be wrote down, or it could be shared with a professional, or just recorded somewhere, so that those wishes and feelings are known for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really, really good advice. And I suppose following on from what you said, this question links quite nicely, but are there any tips on how, I can start a conversation with my loved one about planning my funeral or their funeral, or how can I, initiate that conversation and get that chat started? It's probably quite a difficult thing to bring up.
I think it is, like, as I said, there's no perfect time, but it's about showing why it's important. And sometimes people can be reluctant to talk about it, but actually it's about saying, well, it's important to me to share this so that you know what I want, and that I don't want there to be conflicts when that time comes. And it can be something that you speak about verbally or something you write down. I mean, even there's been people who I've worked with and their favorite song will come on the radio and they'll say, oh, that's the song I want at my funeral, I love that song. Or down to where you go on holiday each year, if that's where you want your ashes scattered, make sure you said it, because it's all them little things that can make a difference. So it doesn't have to be like a sit down meeting where you have bullet points, but it's important just to start them conversations.
Yeah. Sorry.
Some people's fears as well is that the other person doesn't want to speak about it. So a patient may fear that it would upset their loved ones, and a loved one might think it's too awkward to approach. And a lot of the time, both people do want to talk about that. So as Hannah says, if it's not easily done verbally, it could be wrote down, it could be in another way, so that at least that conversation is being started, and just asking the question of what would you want, or when would be best for you to speak about that, just so that there's that opportunity to have them conversations.
Another way, going off of what you guys have just said, is also you can open up that conversation by really leading by example. So why not start with yourself and communicating what you want, and also getting maybe a funeral plan in place for yourself. And then what that does is it allows for you to easily open up a conversation and perhaps even encourage and empower your loved one to also get their plans in place. So it comes from a place where you're leading by example.
Yeah, I completely agree with Jen that I think, doing something together and seeing other people doing it is totally helpful, and making it more kind of a comfortable situation, rather than it just being focused on if it was your parent, it would just be focused on them. If it's a two-way conversation, oh, this is what I've been thinking about, this is what I would be interested in, it makes it more of a two-way kind of back and forth, which can be a little bit more comfortable for both parties.
Yeah, that's some really, really good advice. And I like kind of what Hannah was saying about almost like, when you're in your favourite place, that's almost an ideal time. It doesn't have to be any like pressure or kind of ceremony about talking about what you want in your funeral. It's just those anecdotal little bits of kind of information as and when you're there, and that's much more organic and much more natural. Yeah. And then, you don't know where the conversation might go from that. So that's really, really helpful advice. So this is a question perhaps more for Jen and Holly, but what are my options if I'd like to make my funeral environmentally friendly?
Okay, yeah, I totally recommend doing a bit of research ahead of time and kind of looking into companies that have sustainability at their core. There are actually quite a few funeral companies out there that are dedicated to sustainability and make that one of their main things. And this is kind of the main motivation for a lot of families that come to us. They actually are also interested in the sustainability aspect, and it's really important to them. And that's often why they approach us for a similar reason. The main things I would suggest to kind of look out for when looking at other companies, other funeral providers, is do they work for, are they carbon neutral? This is important because it basically shows that they have considered the amount of carbon emissions that is being produced throughout the process, and they are trying to incorporate positive things that kind of counteract the carbon produced, allowing a carbon neutral output. And this is important because it's just all around going to help the planet. It's also worth looking for any funeral directors that are under the Association of Green Funeral Directors. This is a company dedicated to an organization that's dedicated to just spreading awareness about what green options there are available to families. So it can be small things like this. Oh, my lights have just gone off. There could be small things like this. There could be like big things like this, but there are also like smaller things, such as just simply flowers are very beautiful things to give for funerals, but they're not necessarily the most sustainable thing. So there are other options, such as perhaps planting flowers and having them, that's something that you can grow and watch grow, or even planting trees. So you can slowly kind of watch it grow over time and have that as a reminder. So that would be like a nice kind of way of getting around that.
Yeah, that's a really beautiful idea, actually, as an alternative to having flowers at the funeral, having, and there's things like the Woodland Trust do, you can, plant a tree in memory of somebody there, which is really, really nice. And Hannah and Emily, have you seen any of the any families you've been working with have any creative ideas to make their funerals more environmentally friendly?
Yeah, I had one family, and he wanted to have a cardboard coffin, and this is a coffin. It looks like wood, it feels like wood, but it's actually made of cardboard. And he was dead set on that. He wasn't having, a traditional coffin. He was having this cardboard coffin. And what he wanted was all the grandkids to draw pictures all over it. And so his coffin was this cardboard coffin covered in pictures from all the grandkids who'd drawn their favourite pictures on, and all their favourite memories and little messages. And it was really lovely. And so, yeah, that's one that's always stayed in my mind.
That is really, really lovely. That's a gorgeous story. And Jen, did you want to share anything as well?
I think Holly's covered most of it. I think, there's a lot of small practical things. So, maybe double checking or having a look at your different coffin options, really minimizing the amount of transportation that's, being done throughout the process. So, but yeah, other than that, I think both Hannah and Holly have covered it.
Great, cool, thank you. And so I know you guys kind of covered this a little bit earlier, but what costs are involved in organising a funeral? So what kind of specific costs do people need to be aware of? So Emily and Hannah, I don't know if you want to start with this one.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of costs that people aren't aware of. So right from doctor's fees going right through to, things like hearses, burial fees. There are a lot of costs that you're not aware of. And so it's important to be aware of what there is, and also being clear of that's why it helps to know what someone does or doesn't want. Sometimes families feel obliged to almost get into debt to give a certain type of funeral, whereas there's other times where the last thing someone would want is their family members to be left paying a debt to pay for a funeral that they didn't even, that they didn't even want to some extent. And so it's very important to be clear about what you want and actually being realistic about the cost of things, because the costs can quickly add up, and actually you can find yourselves in debt quite quickly, paying it off for a long time. So it's, and there are different options for bringing your costs down, different types of cremations, right through to some people I know, they don't do the big celebration in a traditional way, but they get the ashes and they almost do a funeral service later, and they go to their everyone meets, goes to their favorite restaurant, and they all say their favorite memory, and that's how they do their funeral. And so it's really worth considering what the costs are and what you actually want, and being realistic of what you can afford.
Yeah, I think what Hannah says about families feeling obliged, that's quite a common theme. And they feel like they owe it their family member, or however expensive it is, expresses how much they love their family member. And people do get into debt to pay for funerals, elaborate funerals, and there's lots of little things that do really add up. So it's just important to know what someone's wishes and feelings are, and to be mindful of that.
Yeah, I'd just like to add briefly on Emily's comment there. It's very true what you say about the a lot of families do feel obliged to spend more than they normally would on a funeral, and it can add up. Like a good example is actually it's quite upsetting, because actually we've read a study recently by Sun Life. They've done a study on kind of what people themselves actually want out of their own funerals, and 42% of people actually said that they want their family to spend as little as possible. And sadly, this isn't always communicated, and a lot of family end up spending more than they have, when in reality, as I said, 42% of people actually don't want them to spend as much at all. They want them to spend as minimal as possible. And this is why options such as direct cremation, where it's a more simple service, are a little bit more better at keeping money and costs low.
Yeah, that sounds like really good advice from everybody there. And I suppose kind of going off that, what if you can't pay for your funeral? What sort of happens then?
So there is government support, as we spoke about previously, in terms of benefits that you may be eligible for, but also there can be social services funerals if there was no funds at all. There potentially could be grants that a family would be eligible for, depending on the person's maybe previous career or the health condition that they had. So that's worth exploring. And it may be worth contacting the solicitors who the loved one used, because they may have already put something in their will, or wrote down their wishes and feelings for them to be able to read, and they may have already allocated that money because they may have already made a funeral plan themselves.
Yeah, okay, that's really, really useful. Really useful to know that there is that extra help out there. And we've just had a question come in on the comments, which kind of, whilst we're talking about money, I think makes sense to ask now. So Aaron's asked, how does one go about using the recently deceased estate to pay for the ceremony in the case that you can't pay it off?
Yeah, so if there was a will in place and they're appointed, they can access the person's bank account and such to use the money for the funeral. If someone has got a bank account, legally that money can be used for a funeral. So you would have to go to the bank, go with the death certificate, things like that. And a person's estate, that means their house, their money, whatever it might be in their accounts, can be used for a funeral, no matter who they are. Mm-hmm. In terms of sort of long-term accessing the money, it's a different process with probate. But yeah, so if it's they've got bank accounts, if you've got lasting power of attorney or a will in place, it's much simpler. But even if you haven't, you can still access that money. And so it's always worth, going down that route to use the money. So as opposed to your own.
Yeah. Just quickly going off of what Hannah said, we actually, we've helped so many families in that circumstance where they've been needing to pay from their loved one's estate. And so it's actually really easy from the funeral director's side. Is oftentimes what we will do is we will send documentation to the bereavement office of the bank branch, and we will attach the invoice with the death certificate, and then really the family doesn't have that burden of, you know, having to chase all the paperwork and worrying about the cost, but they're able to you know, select that option when booking with us, and then we're able to facilitate that very easily for them. So we've had a lot of issues like that arise that we've solved.
Oh, it's really good to hear that. Yeah, that any problems that people have had can be sorted and they can be helped.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you, Aaron, for that question. And whilst we're sort of talking about estates and money and stuff, I've had another question come in from Benjamin, which I think makes sense to answer now. So Benjamin's question is that wills can take a few months to be executed. Does anyone have any other tips?
So if it is for paying for the funeral, you can do it despite not having the will executed and in place. Obviously, certain pots of money take longer to come through, so stuff like pensions, even things like things like pensions and stuff like that. But stuff like what's in the bank account can be accessed much quicker.
Great,
thank you. And anyone else got any other tips?
I'd also say, that sometimes if you are planning your own funeral and you're interested in planning it ahead, sometimes wills can be a little difficult to as you said, it can take sometimes months to put a will together. But there is actually an option to purchase a funeral plan. Not everybody's aware that this is actually a service that's available, and it's quite a sensible thing to do. Basically, you're able to pay for your funeral in advance, and it goes into a special trust, and then that payment won't be released until after you've passed away. And then that going forward, you then have that acted on your behalf. And that means the family don't actually have to worry about the organization process of the funeral, and it's actually all handled as soon as the time comes. And that's just an option round if, for example, doing the will is quite a daunting process, you are actually able to do this as well. And it's just kind of a more simple, streamlined way of having your family organize your affairs after you've passed away.
Okay, thank you. And so thank you, Ben, for that question. And we've had a question come in from Cal as well. It just says, a lasting power of attorney cannot be used after death.
No, if it can sometimes be stipulated if it's for financial affairs, that it will include that initial period if it is paying for a funeral. And so if they've had lasting power of attorney for financial affairs and it's stipulated that they can access the money for a funeral, then that sometimes can take place, and the banks will let you if it's gone through. Yeah. Normally, you can access money in accounts if it's less than about £5,000, and you've got the death certificate, you've got everything like that. The banks normally are willing to support you and help you with that. But obviously, you have to go to the bank directly, go to the funeral director, and see what you can do.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Thank you, Kel, for that question. So I suppose moving on from sort of the funeral planning and all of that sort of side of things, what are some ways that I can remember my loved one after they've died? Anybody got any kind of tips or nice stories there?
Yeah. So like one of the things we do a lot for people are memory boxes, and in them we do it with families, and they'll put in some of their favourite memories. We've known of people put in their favourite perfume, their favourite magazines, and sometimes like we'll ask questions to people even before they've died, stuff that, we call it stuff that people wouldn't know about you, and that'll be who was your favourite teacher at school, what was your favourite memory of this person. It's just filled with all these stuff that you wouldn't necessarily know about the person, and then they can put in photos, things like that. And it's actually something that's really precious. I did it with one lady, and it was for her granddaughter who hadn't yet been born, and she didn't want her daughter to know about it at all. And so we collected all these things in this wonderful box, and all these questions of things you would want to know about your grandma. And it was only when she died she wanted this to be given to her, and so a memory box is something that's really special.
Yeah, and I think well. It could be the other way around. So there could be boxes that people have made about the loved one, and then the other way around. So the patient would make for the people that they're leaving behind. At St Mary's, we do have a children's team, and they've been making hand casts with patients that they can be left for loved ones to hold. So they've got that physical contact with their loved one who's no longer here. Or there's teddy bears which have got voice boxes inside with a pre-recorded message, so they're still able to hear their loved one's voice even after they're no longer here, with an important message which they've left for their family.
I think sorry, I don't know if someone was speaking.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, there's one story that I really enjoy, and this is especially true for people who maybe they were playful or very creative, but we had one remembrance idea of getting a game of Jenga, and what the family or friends can do is on each piece you write a memory of the loved one. And at the end of the game, or at the end of, whatever evening that you're playing Jenga, you have a full game of memories of the one who's passed. So I think just really keeping in mind what was indicative of that person, and, especially if they were playful or really creative, really embodying that through something tangible is a very beautiful thing.
That's a really fun idea. I love that.
And I'll just add also, a lot of our families come to us as well, and we have a tree planting scheme, and this is actually we plant a tree in the memory of the loved one, and this is often something a lot of families find a lot of solace in, just knowing that there's now a plant out there, a tree growing in the name of their loved one, and it just continues to develop through over time, which has just got that kind of poetic feeling to it. That's just a lovely thought as well. So there are so many options I think we've established. There's loads.
Yeah, there's so many.
What's really lovely about all of the examples that all of you've given is they can be really based on the loved one's personality. So, we really, really love nature and love being outside, planting flowers or trees is a really great way to remember them, or like the Jenga idea and the hand casting and all kinds of things. You can really kind of honour the sort of personality of your loved one through your memorial activities, and that's really, really nice to be able to do. And especially with the Hannah's example of the grandparent, like, it's really nice to be able to kind of have the space to do that and to kind of pick all your favourite things, and also think how you want to be remembered as well. It is really, really lovely. Again, it's worth mentioning that if anybody kind of needs support with any kind of memory making activities, that the hospice is always there to help people through that process. So don't hesitate to get in touch. And we just had another question come through on the comments. So from your experience at the hospice, do people have the discussion about how they want their funeral with their family? So how many from the families you work with, do people generally have that chat with their family?
It really does depend on the family, and so sometimes we do find that people have discussed it, through maybe even just watching things over the TV. They mention things. Other people have gone ahead and got like funeral plans in place, and that can be very good if they think that they want to write exactly what they want it paid for, they want everything arranged, and they just don't want their family to have to deal with that on top of grieving a death. Other families that I work with, sometimes that they want to have the discussion, they don't know how, and sometimes they'll come to us and we actually sort of make a forum for them to discuss these things.
Yeah, so we're very much led by the patient and their family, so we wouldn't approach these conversations. We'd wait until they had asked for support with that, and we're happy to facilitate those discussions or give advice and guidance around how to start them conversations, or just being present or for afterwards to offer that emotional support from having difficult conversations.
Oh, that's really, really good. And we've had a couple more questions that have been sent in advance. So what are some creative but environmentally friendly things that I can do with my loved one's ashes? So Hannah and Emily, I don't know if you've got any examples of families you've been working with. Again, Jen and Holly.
Yeah, I know, like, so one of the families I work with, they went to a special location where they'd always been on holiday, and they actually scattered the ashes there. And it was almost like then a yearly thing where they went, each year, obviously not with the ashes, but just to remember the person. And it turned into almost like a ritual of where the person had always gone on holiday, they then went on a yearly basis, and that's where the ashes went.
Yeah, we have a few really beautiful stories as well in regards to this one. It's amazing. There are many companies out there that actually create sorts of really beautiful things to actually facilitate this part of the process. One thing that a family did recently with us is that they actually had an ice urn. So this is like it's basically an urn just made entirely out of ice. And the idea is that you put the ashes inside of it, and then you put it in the sea, and you kind of push it out to sea. And what happens is the ice slowly melts, and slowly over time the ashes are like distributed in the water, and they kind of gently mix into the water. And there's just that kind of really, it's just like a beautiful kind of concept of being returned to the ocean. And it just has no environmental harmful effect because it's entirely water, and there's no litter or anything else produced from the ceremony. So it's quite a beautiful touch.
Wow, yeah, that is gorgeous. That's such a good idea. I've never heard of that, but that's a gorgeous idea. Jen, did you want to add anything?
I'm just trying to think about all of the families that we've helped and what they've done. I think one thing that we haven't done, but hopefully we'll start to implement in the future, there are different types of urns that you can actually plant into the ground. And obviously you put your loved one's ashes inside that urn, and then a tree will then grow in its place. So it's also a very beautiful concept of, life is giving life again, which is beautiful and also environmentally friendly. So yeah,
those are some really gorgeous. I love that ice idea. I've never heard of that, but that is a really gorgeous way to remember a loved one. And for so many people, the sea is a really special place, and like Hannah was saying, with having that place to kind of go where you scattered your loved one's ashes, and to kind of visit that place can be really helpful as part of the grieving process with anniversaries and things like that. So some really lovely stories there. So we've had a few more questions come in on the comments. It's really great to see the comments so busy today. Really great. So I suppose kind of going back a little bit to what we were talking about before, but what do you think is the best way to approach your loved ones to open up the conversation, but talking about funerals? From your experience, what is the general emotion surrounding these topics?
I think people feel quite morbid when talking about funerals. It's a difficult conversation because it's going to be a very difficult time for the family and for a patient as well. They're already grieving what they're going to be leaving behind. So it's about when people are ready. Like we said before, like we wouldn't push those conversations. So it's very much when people feel comfortable to have them conversations. I think in order to support that, there might be some open questions to begin with. So not fixated on funerals, but actually, what would you want your future to look like? What would you like to happen for yourself and your family? And sometimes it will naturally lead on to people's wishes and feelings around their funeral, and sometimes it won't, and that's okay because it can be revisited. So it's not about completing it very quickly, but actually so that there's meaningfulness behind that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really, really good advice, Emily. And we've had another question come in from Bettina, and this is quite an interesting question. So according to your own experience, families that have had that talk about and organised a funeral and have got that plan in place, do you find that they have a more peaceful or an easier grieving process? So I realise it's quite a subjective question because everybody's unique, but what do you kind of find people, do you find that makes it a little bit easier for them?
I find that it does, only because when someone has just died, emotions are so high. And so sometimes the conflicts that come about normally wouldn't be a conflict, but it's because people are grieving already that, you're then trying to work things out with family, and there can actually be arguments and disagreements. And it can be something as small as what type of coffin to have, but actually if that had already been arranged, that disagreement wouldn't have took place. And under normal circumstances, it probably wouldn't take place. But people are so emotional. I think it does help as well, especially if there's certain things that people are very much, I do think we should do this or we should not. You know, something as simple as whether someone should be buried, or, you know, whether someone should have a cremation, can cause a lot of different views. And so actually, yes, it can help having that conversation about what should happen, as long as the person who's planning their funeral feels comfortable doing that.
Yeah, I really understand what Hannah's saying there. We have had a few experiences like that in our past, and we've also had people who've come to us looking for a funeral plan, and they've told me, I remember we had a particular woman who said she said that she really wanted to have this organized in advance, to avoid a possible argument with her children. And she said one of the best gifts that she could give them was that they remain friends after she's gone, and that was really important to her. So yeah, having a plan in place can avoid situations like Hannah mentioned. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think as Hannah said, with, you know, emotions running really, really high, I suppose having a plan in place gives a process to kind of work through, and which can be really, really helpful. You've got, you know, a million other things to think about, and so many emotions that you're feeling, you know, as you experience the death of a loved one. So having that plan can just help kind of iron all of that out. Emily, Jen, have you got any other thoughts on that?
I agree. I think it does help, because you're setting, you know, boundaries at the beginning, and you're really, whenever someone passes away, you're, like I said earlier, you're not in the psychological mindset of making those practical, quick, logical decisions that a plan can really just, you know, ease up. So I think it provides boundaries and conditions, and things are communicated ahead of time, which can only help the process.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we've had a few more questions come in as well. So Katie has asked, can I add my funeral plans to my will, and will these be followed?
Yes, so you can put in your will sort of what your funeral wishes are, like if you want a cremation or a burial, so that it's already recorded.
Yeah, great. That's brilliant. I think having things sort of in place is a theme that we're finding is quite helpful for people to kind of make things easier after death. And we had a question come from Charles. So from what I've heard, funeral directors can have a bit of a bad reputation. So what makes Neo different? Jen and Holly, would you like to share a bit about that?
Mm-hmm. I'm happy to take this one. Well, I feel like there are kind of important things to consider, with us and how we work. Basically, so over the years, the funeral industry isn't unnecessarily regulated in the same way that other industries actually are. It's actually kind of there are less rules in place to stop certain funeral directors from, taking, sometimes they have been known to take some advantage from people who are grieving. For example, as we've established, it could be very costly, a funeral, and there can be ways of kind of pressuring families into spending more than they're comfortable with, because they're already in a vulnerable space. It can happen sometimes, and it's very sad that does happen in some places in the funeral industry. But we work against this, and because of we have structures in place to stop anything like this from happening. In the fact that all of our prices are all inclusive, it means there's kind of no room for adding on anything or any extra costs. Once it's paid, it's kind of stuck at that price, and there's going to be no kind of fluctuation. And it's also extremely affordable. Our plans and our services are a fraction of what they would normally cost by average. And this is because we work with direct cremations, which are the most affordable form of funeral service. And we also have the green element to us as well, of course, the sustainability element, which is very, very important. It's a core part of our company, and it's all about kind of making sure that, you know, the planet is also looked after, as well as the families, and that when you eventually do pass away, you just have this knowledge that there was no negative impact after you're gone, and that's very important for a lot of our families that come to us.
Yeah, I was just saying the stories you were sharing earlier about, you know, the ways of kind of your family sort of remembering people. It's been really, really the environmental impact is really important to so many people. So yeah, thank you so much to everybody for taking the time to sort of share your wisdom today. If anyone's got any other last minute questions, then feel free to just put them through in the comments, and we'll make sure that they get asked. But if you have anything that pops into your head a bit later on, then just feel free to get in touch with either the hospice or with Neo directly and ask your questions. Be more than happy to help. But yeah, thank you so much. It's been really great to have such a knowledgeable panel today who have shared, you know, so much information about all kinds of aspects around funeral planning. And so you can find out more information about the hospice and also about Neo on both of our websites, which I'll be able I'll pop in the chat in a second. And also if you would like to make a donation to the hospice to help us keep funding our services, then the donate page is through on the website as well. So any donations would be greatly appreciated. So I'll just pop those into the chat now. And yeah, thank you so much to everybody for tuning in this lunchtime, and yeah, we hope you have a really good weekend.
Thank you. Helen, could I just make one more last statement, if that's all right? I also just wanted to say real quick before we go, I just wanted to say to Emily and Hannah and all the hospice workers, I just think the work you do is amazing, and I just wanted to say on behalf of Nia that I think in some ways support workers are a bit of an unsung hero, and the work you do is just inspiring. And I just wanted to say, have a little moment just to say thank you so much for the work you do.
Thank you guys, really, yeah.
And it's just the world really needs people like support workers, because especially in these difficult times, your work is really integral. So thank you.
Aww. Well, it's been a real pleasure having you all join us, and yeah, thank you again for your time. And anyone else got any questions, then just feel free to get in touch. But yeah, have a really good weekend all, and yeah, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
Bye.
Right.